Today we have an opportunity to continue our Revelation series with Merlin and Karen Ricklefs. They've done a lot of global travel, done a lot of lecturing on future issues. We have a world that's changing so rapidly, the pace of change is simply hard to comprehend. The kids that are in Sunday school right now are already our digital experts, and soon they'll be running this world of ours. So we're going to have a chance to hear about the world that's going to be around in a few years, a few decades, from Merlin and Karen, and hopefully there'll be an opportunity for questions as we draw to a close. So, Merlin and Karen, it's yours.
Okay, thank you, Dwayne. Appreciate the introduction, and I wanted to thank you and thank Shelley and the Education Committee for inviting us. I think it was probably somewhere around 7, 8 years ago. We were here and told you about our experiences of working in Asia, and we titled our subject at that time, A Changing World, or One Perspective of a Changing World. Well, believe it or not, the world is still changing, and the trends are there, and we got bold enough today to try to give you a view of what the world might look like in 2050. Now, that's a world based upon the trends as we see them, and without intervention or in action, that may be the world we end up with. But there's lots of opportunity, and we're going to talk about that, for what each of us can do to make this a better world and a different world. So with that, Karen, would you like to start? We're going to give an overview of material that we presented in Bangkok, plus a lot of other information that we gathered from our various experiences.
I thought you might like to have a language lesson too. In Thailand, if you greet someone, if you are a woman, you say Sawadi Ka. And if you are a gentleman, you say Sawadi Kra. So, ladies, join me. Sawadi Ka. And you always put your hands together and bow slightly. And gentlemen, Sawadi Kra. Very good, very good. This is the view from our room when we worked at Church-Rochester. Is that better?
Okay, now nobody goes to sleep, promise. There are more seats up here. Please, come on down.
It's almost like teaching school. The students fill up the back, and then if they're desperate, they come up to the front. Let's change those?
Okay, I wanted to back up and just mention one thing. This is the year of the dragon, and since we're studying Revelations, I meant to mention that I wanted to start out with the happy dragon and the more evil dragon. So we have the good and evil dragon in the year of the dragon as a beginning.
As he mentioned, we are using a lot of the material that we used in a breakout session in Bangkok in May. We were at the International Rotary Convention. The attendance was between 38 and 40,000 people. Never been to such a big convention. It was extremely well run, and there were people from 6 continents, and I forget how many countries. Anyway, that's just a brief explanation of who we are that we used. And this was the first time that we worked in Thailand. We worked with Thai International Airways, with all of their education people, the people who trained their pilots, the flight crew, the flight simulators, etc. Oh, and we even got to visit the simulator that you almost felt you were flying an airplane, which was really fun. We worked all week with these people, and we were up at the Rimcock Resort Hotel in Chiang Rai, which is an absolutely gorgeous place. And then we started working with Chulalongkorn University, and you can see our office was up in the upper right-hand corner of that building. And this was similar to Northrop Auditorium at the University of Minnesota. You can relate to that. We taught there from '98 to 2002. Now, I don't know how many of you know who Chulalongkorn is. Anybody? Have you all read the book, The King and I, or Anna and the King? Well, Chulalongkorn was the little boy. When he grew up, he decided that education was a wonderful thing, and so all of the royalty and business people got an education. And then when his son became king, he named the leading university after his father, Chulalongkorn University. That's where we taught. Our first visit to China was in 2002, and you probably all recognize this area, the Forbidden City. This was our staff when we worked with Sun Yat-sen University in Guangzhou and Shenzhen. As you can tell, they have a lot of people to help you.
This is the message we wanted to communicate from this picture, is when working with China, working with Asia in general, they have a lot of people. We had a one-day seminar. This was the staff. There's 40 folks there that supported us for that one day.
It was interesting when we were invited to come for the 80th anniversary of Sun Yat-sen University. They said, we've never had an English-speaking professor talk to our group, and we don't know how many people will come, but we think it might be between 40 and 60. We got there, flew in one night on Thursday night, and we're starting our seminars on Saturday, and we said, how many? And they said, 400. And by the last day, we had 600. We had to do a bit of changing in how we were going to present things. This was like the central campus of Sun Yat-sen. And this is one of the lecture halls. And we have been working with 22 groups of Chinese executives for the last few years. They come to the China Center at the University of Minnesota. And we've worked with 22 delegations, and we've hosted 12 delegations in Rochester. And the reason we started to do that was when we were in Beijing, they were having the People's Congress, and one of the biggest problems that they were addressing was that they had 800 million people in the rural areas who were not benefiting from the economic growth of China. They had to come into the big cities. And I was talking to them, and they said, you know, we have to have these big cities. And I said, you don't have to have a big city to have a very successful place to live and work. And I said, how about coming to Rochester? We were named the #1 city to live back about that time. And I said, you can see that you can have a very viable way of life in a small city. So since then, we've hosted 12 delegations to Rochester, and we've taken them to IBM, Mayo Clinic, the Government Center, and depending on what their interests were, whether we took them to like the Federal Medical Prison, etc.
An Olmsted Medical Group. An
Olmsted Medical Group, correct. We also hosted some of the groups in our home, and this was the first Rochester delegation in 2002, and they were from the Beijing municipal government. And it was really interesting to find out that one of those individuals was named the person in charge of the logistics for the Beijing Olympics, and you know how well they ran. So we hope we had a little bit of an impact on how he did things. Now what we normally do is teach executive leadership, strategic business analysis, ethics and values, total quality management, and traction. A lot of people go through the first ones, and then they say, well, how do I get started? So we developed on that too. And so we've combined the lessons learned, you know, the basic facts, the developing trends, the research studies and reports, and this is how we have gotten to what we predict the future world in 2050 may be like. Now our session in Bangkok was at the Impact Center. I've never seen such a big convention center. Our subject was a changing world, literacy, education, and the future of humanity. And our focus was on why literacy and education are important, how Rotarians can help, and how district leadership can motivate and assist. This was the new international airport in Bangkok. Absolutely incredibly huge, beautiful, leading technology, amazing, and of course they had things that let you know, oh, I am in Bangkok, as you can tell by the statue there. This was the Impact Center where the convention was, and it was absolutely an incredible facility, very modern, very efficient. This was the inside of the plenary session. It's 6 football fields long. And if you can see, this was the center stage. That's it way up there. Gives you some idea of how huge that was. They planned the convention to be when the colleges had vacation, so we had lots of college students who helped us. They were a very enthusiastic group, which was really fun. This was our session, and this shows part of the people in our session. It was interesting. We had 2.5 hours to set everything up in the room, and we walked in, and there was a gentleman sitting in the 2nd row. And I went over and I said, "May I help you?" And he said, "I'm so anxious to hear what you have to say that I had to get here early so I'd have a good seat." We thought that was great. Our session was an 1.5 hours long, and people stayed for an hour afterwards and asked questions. So,
Convention, we had people from 6 continents. We took a survey of the audience.
Yeah.
And you were going to comment on the folks from India.
Oh yes, you want to turn that? Oh, you don't have that next?
No.
Okay. I'll get to that then. Okay, today we're adapting this presentation to Zumbro, and we've called it World 2050 and the Future of Humanity, and our focus will be on understanding the world that is rapidly changing and beyond any previous experience that any generation has had. And the importance of a literate and well-educated people all over the world is very important. And we want to develop a sense of urgency for action by everybody, not just people, in our own community, but all around the world. And our message for the world today is the children of the world need an education to not just make this a better world, but an education to make this a different world. This is better. In Bangkok, you can walk, you can ride your bike, you can ride in a tuk-tuk. This is a tuk-tuk, and that's fun. But if you were looking for something different, then they have the SkyTrain. Totally silent. It's up 3 stories high, so it doesn't interfere with the traffic on the street. In fact, you can walk on the street levels. Otherwise, there's traffic or sidewalks. You see the level there. That's for people to walk. And so you can have these millions of people traveling every day, and they aren't in each other's way. And we think, what are they doing in Minneapolis and St. Paul? They're putting the old trolleys back in that I remember when I was a kid. Okay? And if you want to think really different, Bill Gates is one of those who's thinking way out of the box. And he has become aware that 2.6 billion people do not have access to a safe and affordable sanitation, toilets in other words. And he hosted a fair to reinvent the toilet. That was in August. And 8 university finalists from around the world, and number 1 was California Institute of Technology based on solar power generating hydrogen and electricity. And in the UK, in Loughborough, 2nd place, and they produced biological, charcoal, minerals, and clean water. And the design criteria was no water pipes, no sewer connection, no outside electricity, and cost less than 5 cents a day. And they did it. Is this going to change the world, even here? Now, as we said, it's important to start thinking differently. And most of us, every time we've looked at a map, north was at the top, right? There's no reason it has to be that way. Here's with north at the south. That's starting to think differently. And why is it important to understand this? Children beginning school this fall will be the future leaders in 2050. And how will they need to think, work, live, and learn to be successful participants and effective leaders? They will need to learn to read, and then they will need to read to learn.
Okay, I'd like to go through a couple of approaches here to get our mindset and our thinking a little bit different being here in Rochester, Minnesota. I wanted to start with this general map of the world, the right side up, the way we've usually looked at it. And the way most of us went to school, this is the way the map was in the front of the room or wherever we had our geography lessons. But I wanted to point out that there's a lot more people in this world that went to school and looked at a map very much like this. A map which showed Asia, Africa in the center, the North America off to one side, South America off to the other side. First impression, you start to think about the world in a little bit different perspective. Now, also to put into perspective the fact that when you spend a fair amount of time living on the other side of the world, you begin to realize that we here in the United States, as big as we think we are a fairly small country, and we are, in many regards, an island. For example, we have 315 million people. China has 1.35 billion. India, 1.25 billion. The ASEAN group of nations, about 0.6 billion people. Total, about 3 billion people within that region of the world. And that's where our focus is primarily going to be this morning. Now, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the ASEAN community, but it was assigned as a legal community about 4 years ago, 12/14/2008. The ASEAN nations consist of 10 countries, Myanmar, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, North Vietnam, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, Brunei, the Philippines. I think I got close to 10. Anyway, it's that region of the world, very much like the European Union, a much more difficult political, economic, and social group of nations to pull together, but they're making real progress. Now, those group of nations that I just described, they account for nearly 1/2 of the world's population. And China and India also have a very young population. Remember now, we're a little over 300 million people. China has 320 million people under the age of 14. India has 400 million people under the age of 14. Quite a different age perspective. There are more people in China that speak English than there are English-speaking people in the United States. And it's estimated that 100 million people outside China are learning Chinese. There's 350 Confucius Institutes around the world. University of Minnesota, associated with the China Center International Programs, has one of those Confucius Centers. They're working with the schools here in Rochester. Their focus is to teach the Chinese language and develop an understanding of the Chinese culture. Now, again, to kind of put the world into perspective. If the world consisted of 100 people, first off, it would say in 2010, 13 would be in Africa, 60 in Asia, 12 in Europe, 9 in Latin America and the Caribbean, 5 in Northern America, and 1 in Oceania, and 80 would be in poverty, and 70 would be illiterate. Now, flash forward to 2050, here's how the world is changing. The 13 in Africa goes to 22. Asia, down just a little. Europe, down quite a bit. Latin America, about the same. North America, about the same. Oceania, about the same. You just see the changing demographics of the world. That doesn't speak to the changing ethnic makeup of North America, including Canada, the United States, and Mexico. Now, if you wake up in good health, you're luckier than 1 million who won't live through the week. If you can go to worship without fear, you're luckier than 3 billion. And if you have food, clothes, a roof over your head, a place to sleep, you're wealthier than 75% of the world's people. And our point this morning is that we can all help but we have to focus on making this a different world. I wrote an editorial about 3 years ago and said that our greatest concern is that we'll utilize our resources to try to get this world back to the way it was before the recession that we've been going through. Unfortunately, as I look back those 3 years, 4 years, and look ahead, we still seem to be utilizing our resources to get the world back to the way it was, the way we once liked it. Point is, our message, and we'll, I think, make that this morning, is that world's not there, and we probably can't get there. And what we should be focusing on, need to focus on, is this different world, and how are we going to get to that different world. First off, innovation is going to be key. And again, to put things into perspective, I like to divide all of humanity into 3 phases. The first phase I call the ancient world, then the transitional world, which we're living in today, and the future world. The ancient world goes from the ancient past up to the Industrial Revolution. The earth accumulated many resources. Mankind really didn't know how to use them effectively. Now, as we enter the Industrial Revolution, I've defined this as going into a transitional world of about 250 years, where mankind did learn how to utilize the Earth's stored resources effectively. The developed nations especially were effective, the United States being one of the most effective in the world, which gives us the standard of living which we have become accustomed to. Today, we stand at a point in time where we're moving beyond the earth being plentiful with resources. We're moving into a world of limited resource where sustainability is going to be a major focus of everything we do. Globalization is with us. We are interconnected, and that will continue. It's complex. We're being faced with huge amounts of data, which is being analyzed more completely and precisely every day. It definitely will be a different world. There is no precedent, but it is the future of humanity. Now, the problem, as we speak to a global audience and as we speak to you this morning, is the people of the world are not adequately preparing for the future they face. The toilet that Karen described that Bill Gates was working on, that's a beautiful example of the kind of thinking we need for almost everything we do. Now, a few facts. In the last 20 years, China has moved 250 million people, nearly the population of the United States, from farms and villages into cities. And they've lifted 400 million people above $1 a day, which they define as the poverty level. The challenge here for leadership is moving people who have lived a lifetime in a single era. Let me see if I get this right. They've lived their lifetime in a single era, and now we're going to move them through, no, they've lived several lifetimes in a single era, and now the leadership challenge is moving them through several eras in a single lifetime. Think of that as a leadership challenge. Approximately 800 million people are not benefiting, as Karen mentioned earlier. 150 million live on less than $1 a day yet today. And it's a major concern of the Chinese government. They're concerned about the unrest and the dissatisfaction, appropriately so, among those people. And 1/4 of India's 1.1 billion people also live in poverty today. One of the things we've learned from working with the Chinese and in China is there is a tremendous amount of loyalty for those who have immigrated from China to retain that loyalty and be motivated to go back and help those who did not have the opportunity to leave and develop a better life somewhere else. Many Asian universities are partnering with leading US universities. Education has a tremendous emphasis. And for example, at Chulalongkorn University, Sasin is the graduate school for management. They have partnered with Wharton University and with Northwestern. Now, it was interesting talking about the history of that partnership. The Chulalongkorn folks, of course, were very interested in this. Each of those two universities in the United States were individually interested, but when they heard they had to work together, it was kind of like, whoa, wait a minute, we've never done that before. So that was the challenge. Not working with the Asian university, but working with each other. But they've done well, and it's a very fine management school at this point. Building educational facilities to host foreign experts is something we experienced in China, almost like a first-class hotel, to bring foreign experts in with auditoriums for the Chinese executives then to be trained right there within Beijing. And if you feel like we're getting left out here anywhere, US brands are everywhere. But I was also surprised to learn that KFC is more dominant than McDonald's. Interesting. Now, what I'd like to do is walk through some trends and projections. And I'm going to talk about expanding capability, and I'm going to talk about expanding demands and challenges. But what I want you to keep in mind is I describe this within the Chinese language and written idioms. Challenge and opportunity tend to mean the same thing. So as I talk to a challenge, I want you to think, what are the opportunities that we could derive here? How could we pursue this to turn that barrier into an opportunity? And I'll talk to that as we begin to wrap up here today. But the opportunities are substantial, but it's for those who are prepared. That's the key. Now, I'm going to talk first about technology, skills, some large-scale production, and deep space exploration as it's expanding around the world. First, a little bit of a history lesson, and one date I want you to focus on is July 20th, 1969. Many of you may remember that date. We landed a man on the moon. But I wonder how many of you ever thought about the fact that most of that, the design work that went into that was done with a slide rule. I used to have a 6-inch one in my pocket and a 12-inch one on my belt when IBM sold out their training program. We bought the 13-foot one, which hung in our living room for a while, until we finally decided to have a better home at the University of Minnesota in Duluth. So that's where it is at the moment. But the moon lander was designed with a slide rule. It had a processor on board, but that processor, 2 kilobytes of memory. Any of you that can relate to that says, wow, that's like nothing. And it had less processing power than a simple cell phone today, and you can't even begin to compare it to an iPhone. In fact, the typical car today has 40 computers. This had one very simple computer. Moving forward, another date then I want you to focus on is February 17th, 2011. And that in some regards brings us right back here to Rochester, because Rochester is the home of IBM supercomputer. Watson in particular was the winner on Jeopardy. Some of you may have watched that. Its unique characteristics is that it functioned at the level of the best human players. It has an unprecedented ability to analyze the human language. That's different. That's special. That is unique. It also has the capability to hold the knowledge of 1 million books, which is essentially a lifetime of learning and experience for the best of human beings. Now, many have identified this as an historic event, equivalent to putting a man on the moon. And the significance of putting a man on the moon was a technological achievement, but from a human point of view, it was being able to be out there in space and look back at the Earth as this marble floating out there, rather lonesome in the universe. This development of Watson is going to change our lives as it evolves. That's my prediction. You don't hear a lot of advertisement from IBM in that regard, but that's my sense. Their first application is going to be medical. They've already signed contracts with WellPoint to develop it as a physician's assistant. They've also have contracts with Rice University in Houston, Texas, Sao Paulo in Brazil. And within 7 to 9 years, that computational capability will be on an iPhone, an iPad, a laptop computer, the kind of thing that our kindergartners, our grade school kids, will be taking off to college in their backpack. And the question is, what do we need to teach them? What do they need to learn to be able to use that kind of computational capability effectively? Now, this isn't strictly a US thing. I showed this chart to give you some idea of how computational performance capability is expanding around the world. If you go back to 6/11, there's 58.7 petaflops of supercomputer capability in the world. And what's a petaflop? Well, it's a quadrillion. It's 10 to the 15. And I was just thinking before I came in here, if I got it right, I think it's a million trillion. It's even bigger than our national debt. We're getting big. Okay. Within 6 months, that had grown to, a year ago, 74.2 petaflops. 6 months ago, 123.4. And next week, we'll find out where it is. This is monitored by a group in Europe every 6 months. They identify the top 500 supercomputers in the world. And I wanted to show you this list that a year ago, Japan, Fujitsu was #1. A year before that, or shortly before that, IBM was #1. This truly is a leapfrog kind of competition. Now, #2 was China. The first time they had ever introduced a supercomputer to the world, they come in as #2 as the fastest supercomputer. Then Cray, and then dawning is second China system, and on down. Now, fast forward to 6 months ago, IBM did leapfrog back into #1, and #3, #4, #7, #8. Alive, well, and aggressive. Fujitsu #2, China #5, and #10. The point from this is the world has a rapidly growing, globally competitive environment for supercomputer computational capability. Let's talk a bit about skills, programmer skills, because these devices have limited usability, applicability without being programmed for some application. IBM has sponsored a programming contest every year. This last year it was in Warsaw, Poland, and it's called the Battle of the Brains. It involves 3 university students on each team. They address 8 problems with a 5-hour deadline. It's a test of creativity, innovation, teamwork, logic, strategy, and mental endurance. The kinds of things that we think as a nation we're superior at and that we're really good at, and we are. But there's 112 finalist teams appeared from a over 2,000 universities that originally competed, representing over 25,000 students, and 85 countries and 6 continents. Now again, I thought you might be interested in where the 112 finalists came from. Asia 38, Europe and Russia 28, North America 22, Latin America 17, Africa, Middle East 5, South Pacific 2. And I think it's important to note that the USA has 18 teams from 18 universities. China has 18 teams, if you include Hong Kong, from 18 universities, as does Brazil 6, Mexico 3, and the Russian Federation of 12. I think those are important things to note about where we have capable people, capable schools. And a high degree of pride, and I think in that 6 Midwest universities around us sponsored teams which were within that 112 finalists. Minnesota, Iowa State University, Wisconsin, University of Chicago, University of Illinois, and the Illinois Institute of Technology. Again, let's fast forward. The previous winners, I just selected to make a point here. For the past 4 years, the 4 finalists, and you can see China had 5, USA 2, Russia 6, Taiwan 1, Ukraine 2. The last ranking showed the winner was St. Petersburg State of Russia, then the University of Warsaw, Poland, they were the host, and then Moscow Institute of Physics and Technology, and then Shanghai Jiaotong University in China. Unfortunately, our United States premier universities tied 3 at position 18, Carnegie, MIT, and Princeton, and then the University of Central Florida, University of Southern California, 36, and our Midwestern universities, honorable mention, but not among the top 50. The point to be taken away, the world's developing many universities capable of educating competitive, high technology skills. Now, let's go a little bit into the future. It's a future where machines answer the questions, and as I've said, eventually we will change the way we think, the way we work, and the way we live. Ray Kurzweil is a very noted professor at MIT and a futurist. His message is that in 2045 will be the end of civilization as we know it. Food for thought, food for a lot of discussion. And let me explain what he has in mind. First off, he's very knowledgeable of this accelerating change of technology. I know you can't read it from back there, but from the agricultural revolution to the industrial revolution, it was about 8,000 years. From the industrial revolution to the light bulb, it was about 120 years. From the light bulb to the moon landing, another 90 years. From the moon landing to the World Wide Web, or the internet, was about 22 years. And now to the human genomes being sequenced, about 9 years. So this rate of technological advancement is accelerating. Taking a look at a very busy chart, I apologize for that, but the message here is looking at calculations per second for $1,000. That is computational performance that you can buy for $1,000. Something like this laptop sitting here now is no more than $1,000. Okay? IBM introduced the personal computer in 1981, followed very closely by Apple. And Apple got to the, IBM didn't quite make the $1,000 target, but Apple came along shortly thereafter at about $1,300. Then we have the IBM Watson, which clearly is not $1,000, a multi-million-dollar machine, but within another 5, 10, 12 years, will be up here on this line for $1,000. And it's projected then by Dr. Kurzweil that by 2023, for $1,000, you'll buy the capability to have the computational capability to surpass the power of the human brain, one human brain. That's what our kids in school are going to take off to college. Their kids, by 2045, will have the computational capability in a $1,000 device. That's what's significant. It's in a $1,000 device that most anybody can buy. Their grandchildren will go off to college with the capability to surpass the brain power equivalent of that of all human brains in the world. What are they going to do with it? Okay, that's a question for us to ponder today. Now, on the human side, I had the opportunity a week ago at a recognition session for Jen's sister at the University of Minnesota to sit beside a professor whose research is on studying the effect of electronic media on human communication. For example, the simple iPhone. As we witnessed it being used in the Middle East, we saw a group of people work together, overthrow an established dictatorship in 18 days in Egypt. And we've seen this evolve throughout the Arab Spring. I envision, we've all seen the swallows swarm together like this. It's amazing. How do they do that? Question I have in my mind, will we be able to get humans to the point where we can have their minds all interconnected electronically so they have a massive human knowledge, capability, and skill, become motivated towards a single goal with a single plan? We saw, I think, the beginnings of that. So that's an insight into our future. I showed this, it's a bit old, hair appliances. You've maybe have seen them now appearing in many of our retail stores. Chinese design, Chinese manufactured, some of it manufactured in the US. But the point I wanted to make is that they announced September last year, haven't seen it on the market, but I can anticipate it coming, that they're working on mind-reading technology, so you don't need to have the remote in your hand as I do here. All I have to do is think about it, and the brainwaves will change the channels. Now, if it'll change the channels, you can begin to think about what else it might do. Now, does all of this sound really outlandish and ridiculous and out there? Let me just come back and ask you how far we've already advanced today. How many have artificial knees, artificial hips, a heart pacemaker, we wear eyeglasses, lens implant, and you can kind of go on and on and on. Much of what's making us be as vital as we are as human beings today has to do with incorporating more of the electronics, machine technology into our bodies. And so this is a projection of the kinds of things that may be possible. Now I'm going to switch to large-scale production. You may or may not have heard of Geely Automotive. Geely is the largest private auto company in China. They purchased Volvo in 2010. They committed to an investment of $10 to $11 billion over 5 years. And they've just announced they're going to build a new manufacturing plant in Northeast China and one in Southeast China. Northeast and Southeast. And they've reported that they've had their best year ever for Volvo under Chinese ownership. And when we were in Bangkok, they announced that they had just recruited Jeremy Lin as their Volvo brand administrator, the famous, tall, Taiwanese basketball star. And they're relating all of the characteristics of Jeremy Lin with the way you ought to think about a Volvo. Fascinating. It isn't just China. India, Tata Motors owns 98 companies. They purchased Jaguar and Land Rover in 2008. They entered, now, again, I'm trying to make a point here also about innovation and creativity. We think we have an educational system that is unique, second to none for doing that, and that we're very innovative and creative people. And all of that is true. But it isn't just us. In India, this tiny car is a big hit. It's the nano car. Sells for $2,500. And it's the first car brand being sold on eBay. I put the website up there, which I know you probably can't just memorize and walk away, but go and log on to Tata Motors and then go onto their website and look at their eBay advertisement. It'll blow you away from a creativity point of view. Fascinating. They're also, now, Mahindra. I'd never heard of them either until a few months ago. But they're a global auto and tractor manufacturer in India. Their motto, I think you'll find interesting, is products, services, and possibilities to enable people to rise. They're in 100 countries. They happen to be the world's #1 selling tractor. More than John Deere. More than John Deere. Now, they aren't as big, as you can see from the photo, but they are big, okay? It isn't just garden tractor stuff. This is real stuff. And they just announced last month a compact SUV for the world, and they're noted for having extremely rugged SUVs because of the infrastructure they have to deal with in India. Of course, now, U.S. innovation. We were in the Seattle area last spring. We looked at the Tesla. That S signature is the leader. They're completely sold out for production. It's a fascinating design. That floor is the battery. It's a motor and a couple wheels in the back. It's the suspension and the steering wheel in the front, but on the body you got a car. You can have a car. Extremely simple, straightforward construction. And they appear to be on a path to a very successful rollout. Now, let's get back to Asia. Aircraft production. China has developed and delivered a 90-passenger jet as far back as 2009. They're the only nation in the world that has an assembly plant for the Airbus 320. They are developing their own competitive product to Airbus and Boeing. They purchased Cirrus Industries in Duluth, Minnesota about a year ago as the is an introduction into the private aircraft industry. And they just bought Hawker Beechcraft in July this year. They have test flown a long-range fighter, similar to our F-22, which will be based inland, but have the capability to cover the South China Sea. And they've launched their first aircraft carrier and made note of that in August. In terms of going to the moon, they have their large Long March rocket. They've had their first manned space docking in June of this year. They plan for their own space station and then continuing flights beyond that. How did they get here so fast? Well, they have financial wealth. They have bought technology from the Russians, and they have students that are learning from our top schools. US, we have shuttled the shuttle program. We're going with private industry, and the most noted there is the SpaceX Dragon spacecraft, which was launched in May of this year. And they put up the very first commercial space rocket, was it last week, on its way to the International Space Station. So we are trying, from our entrepreneurial point of view, to turn this into a profit-making venture. A picture of the SpaceX Dragon spacecraft. Now, take a look at some of the demands and challenges. First off, population. We are at 7 billion on this planet today, growing to 9 billion by 2050. There will be severe competition for food, water, energy, and materials. It is a developing global crisis. Those who study this more than I say that the world can sustain 1 billion people at the level of consumption that we enjoy here in the United States. If we were to reduce our consumption to that of Europe, the world could support 2 to 3 billion people. We're at 7, going to 9. Doesn't compute. Now, it's also important that we prepare for a megacity future, cities over 10 million. Current growth is unsustainable, unprecedented, ecologically disasters for human civilization as these cities are developing today. Some are focusing on the issues such as Shanghai, New York, Lagos, Guangzhou, New Delhi, building offshore wind farms, evaluating seawalls, building recycling facilities, zero-emission skyscrapers, etc. Drinkable water from a Siemens technology plant. Now, I'm not going to go through this. I just want to make a couple points that there are opportunities and challenges in these megacities. The point that I didn't relate to before is that right in the middle, my point is cities enable the density of ideas and coordination, and humans learn from the people around them, and that research centers are cropping up within the slums, because who knows better how to develop products that can be used in very severe situations at a very low cost than the people that were living there. So there's new opportunities for new entrepreneurs in the slums of these mega cities. Of course, they need an effective public sector, police, clean water, roads, etc. Now, the point I want to make here from what we've discussed is the World Food Challenge at this moment, as we stand here, is the biggest ever in history. There's a need to produce more food in the next 40 years than all of the last 10,000. And there's 3.9 billion people living under severe water stress today. There's a growing middle class in developing countries. Starvation exists in many places. And the October of this year, United Nations Food Insecurity Report says there's 870 million hungry people in the world today. And to put that into perspective, this is the material we were presenting last spring. Today's wheat supply just matches demand, if you look at that red line versus the blue bars on the right. Today's corn supply is the tightest in 38 years. a 50-day supply. Soybeans seem to be going into China to degrees which we find hard to measure, and there's a drought in China and a huge demand. We predicted last spring, from the information that we had, this year would be drier and it would be hotter, and that's turned out to be the case. And the picture on the left showing China is turning into a desert. Mao, with his plans of a few years ago, turned Western China, did to Western China what we did here in the United States back in the days of the Dust Bowl and the Depression. We were in Beijing, when the wind was so strong and the dust was so thick, we couldn't have seen that wall over there. And that happens nearly every year. Now, what's coming? This I just picked up last week. Get ready for harsher Minnesota winters. Now, this is the good news part, right? Okay. For the next 15 to 20 years, we'll be back to the 50s and the 60s. And especially harsh conditions every 89 years, based on tracking past patterns. The last most severe was 1936. The next is likely to be about 2025. Also, tracking corn yields in Iowa, which reflects the weather. There seems to be periods of 25 years of erratic yield growth, erratic weather, and then there's 19 years of steady growth. And we have just finished the 19 years of steady, okay, going into erratic. And I just moved this bottom curve up a bit to see where would we be in 2050. We will just begin to be going into the erratic pattern in 2050, compounding all of the other issues. But here's another way, maybe some of you saw this in the Wall Street Journal just a few days ago. This is going up in Sweden. That's growing food right in the heart of these mega cities. This is a building, the green is actually food. And the food starts at the top, works its way all the way down, then is harvested and eaten. Another way to go. If you think about the cost of getting food into the city, maybe this becomes more practical. Okay, Karen?
Thank you. I'm going to talk a little bit about the education requirements for this future that we are...
5.
Pardon?
We're down to 5.
Ooh, okay, I'll do this very quickly. This shows the post-secondary requirements for most jobs. It's increasing all the time. And the jobs that are available with no experience and no high school diploma are going down. And this is what these large numbers of students who do not finish high school are facing. Their competition around the world will be those people who are working for $1 a day. Okay. Now, education is the key to productivity, and if you look at that last bar, the people in our current workforce, 25 years old and older, have an average education level of a minimum of a high school diploma. Look at the ones right behind them. We're down to 78%. And then they've got each group in Minnesota, and it says white, 83%. Well, if we had it divided between men and women, the only one that meets that 92% are white females. The boys are getting way below. That's a big problem. Now, this is not sustainable. If we keep doing what we're doing, and we don't change and improve, then the good life as we know it will no longer exist. These kids that are growing up, not getting an education, they're the ones who are going to sustain our standard of living? I don't think so. Now, this is across the United States. This is the average across the United States in the blue. Minnesota is up there in the gold. And you can see that on the average, we are better than the average of the United States.
But the trend is down.
But the trend has been going down. Like back here is higher.
Oops, I got
You skipped one. Okay. This.
Sorry.
Here it shows the rankings of each state. Maine is number 1 at 87%. Vermont is second. I can't even read it because it's in there.
New Jersey.
New Jersey. Anyways, Minnesota is 4th in the nation. And you think, oh boy, that's really good. And then it goes on down, the average in the United States is here, and goes all the way down to Nevada, where they only have 50%. And here's another graphic explanation. The dark blue are the ones who have the highest rates of graduation. You can see what's happening across the southern tier. Now this is an international view of it. And of course we always think we're number one, right? Aren't we number one? Well, guess what? In reading, we're only 14th. In science, we're only 17th. And in math, 25th. And as a math major, that just makes me sick. This is a little joke. Can you believe 30% of us high schoolers will drop out? Dude, that's like half. There's another math problem. No problem. I'm going to work for the Chinese when they take over.
Okay, help wanted, $1 an hour. Okay.
And in the U.S., we are the leaders in the number of people in jail or prison. Isn't that something to be proud of? And if you look at those people who are in prison, 4 of 5 are people with below basic literacy. We could probably do something about that, prevent these kids from being illiterate, and maybe they won't go to prison. Okay?
Let's skip this.
Okay.
Okay. The point being, well, there is a point, very quickly.
There is a point on this. If you look at who is graduating with PhDs in our leading universities across the U.S., in 2010, 35% of them got their undergraduate degrees other places in the world. And you can see Tsinghua and Peking University are 1 and 2. They're both in Beijing. Number 3, we finally get a U.S. school at Berkeley. And then the 4th one is Seoul, Korea. And then the 5th one is university. And you can notice the Chinese ones are going up. The U.S. ones are going down in numbers. And then another thing that just came up is, why are the skilled immigrants leaving the U.S.? We're no longer the only land of opportunity, and they're returning home. And another thing, we don't give visas to those people once they come over here, study, get their PhD. They can't even stay here and work. And this gives some world facts too. The top 10 countries, the economies of foreign citizenship for PhDs, and they get them in non-science and engineering fields, a very small number. And large numbers in that. And if you look at these, China, India, South Korea, Taiwan, Thailand, Japan, they're all Asian. Huge number. One of the things that I found interesting when we were doing our breakout session in Bangkok was I mentioned that India had mandated that all children aged 6 to 14 had to be in school. And this was a huge change for India and their culture. And I said this is a wonderful ideal to work towards. And one of the women in the crowd was from India, and she said, this is a terrible problem for us. These kids have no homes, they have no food, we have to try to feed them, etc., etc. And another gentleman stood up and said, we are going to do this. I'm with the government. We are determined. At an EA.
Let me skip these.
Okay.
Okay, let me make a comment here then from what we have shown you so far. The implication of this is that as developing countries develop, the promise of achieving the developed world's quality of life as we know it is just not realistic. And continuing the developed world's rate of consumption as we know it, that's also not realistic. So the future will be a different world, and where what we often call pretty good is not going to be good enough. I'm going to skip this. I might just say, if we look at our national issues today, national security, healthy economy, sustainable, affordable health care, which I think we can all agree on, that is inconceivable. We're going to achieve that without a great educated workforce, and it's not a matter of priority, it's a matter of survival. The time is now, and we need to start because we can't start any sooner. Just a few words on the economy, and I'll wrap up here. In 2007, China passed Germany to become the world's 3rd largest economy. In 2009, China passed Japan to become the world's 2nd largest economy. And it's projected they will pass the USA in 2041 and become the world's largest economy. India is following a similar pattern close behind. And if you look at the red arrow down there in the bottom, I put in current data that's clearly above the brown curve for the projection for China. Some people have said China will become the first economy as soon as 10 years. This is where I wanted to get to then, a different world, 2050. China the leading economy, USA second, India close behind, Germany probably leading the European Union. To what level, we don't know yet. There'll be 9 billion people, mega cities, a shortage of resources, that $1,000 computer with the power of all human brains, globally connected, dynamic global centers of production around the world, deep space exploration, probably to Mars and beyond by that time, and definitely pretty good is not going to be good enough. And I think we've run out of time, so we'll stop right there. Thank you for your attention.